I want to speak today about prevention. When you look at causes of sexual abuse, there are certain ones that are common to all offenders. There are others that are individual to each offender. In between, within any given organisation, such as a church, there is what you might call a culture, and there can be unhealthy elements in that culture which either contribute to abuse or else contribute to the poor response to abuse. And what I want to do this afternoon, is tell you of 12 such elements within the culture of the church to which I've belonged, the Catholic Church, that I believe fall into that category. They're contributing factors either to the abuse or to the response to the abuse. The first of them is the angry God. In any religion, everything without exception depends on the kind of God that is being worshipped. It's the single most important fact about any religious system. And within the whole history of the Catholic Church, there's been far too much of the angry God. The Inquisition was only the worst example, it was far from the only one. It created a church in which, despite the talk of love, practice was based far too much on fear rather than love. Spirituality was often seen in the negative terms of self-denial, self-abasement, rejection of the world, and the Christian life was too often seen as overwhelmingly right behaviour before a judgmental God. And so a constricting guilt played too much part in that life. These are unhealthy ideas, and they've contributed to unhealthy actions of all kinds. The second element is the male church, because sexual abuse is overwhelmingly a male problem. Yes, there have been female offenders, but there have been a very small percentage, 2% perhaps. In relation to the response to abuse, the temptation to subject all other matters to the overriding importance of one's own good name and honour is again an overwhelmingly, women are capable of that, but it's overwhelmingly again a male problem with a long history behind it in so-called honour-shame societies. And it's simply stating the obvious to say that if women had been given a far greater importance and a much stronger voice in the church would not have seen the same level of abuse and would have responded far better. The third element is the culture of celibacy, because it means that the predominant culture within the church has not just been male, but celibate male, because all power has been in the hands of celibate males. This compounded the problem of male dominance. I'm not suggesting that celibacy is the sole or even predominant cause of abuse. If it were, then there would be no abuse in, say, the Anglican Church. But I believe that celibacy has made a significant contribution, both directly and indirectly. It has certainly been a major contributor to that other massive problem the Church has not yet begun to face, and that Margaret Kennedy spoke about, the sexual abuse of adult females. Actually, celibacy itself is not the problem, but obligatory celibacy. Because a celibacy that is freely embraced out of a passionate love for God and people is not unhealthy. The celibacy of Francis of Assisi, of Mother Teresa, of people like that. But a celibacy that sometime after ordination or profession becomes unwanted, unaccepted and unassimilated is both unhealthy and dangerous. The preparation for a life of celibacy in the seminaries was negative. Don't do this, avoid that. And there was little assistance in building healthy relationships. There was in all of that an undervaluing of the importance of human love and friendship, and that contained serious dangers. Given sufficient motivation, some young persons might be prepared to embrace a life without genital sex. But no young persons in their right mind would ever consider embracing a life without love. And sadly, many priests and religious are living their lives without an adequate sense of loving and being loved. And this leads, I believe, not only to abuse, but also to such things as alcoholism, misogyny, and the seeking of power. Properly understood, celibacy is a gift, and it must therefore be seriously questioned, where you can take a gift and institutionalize it through a law. If obligatory celibacy is to continue, it's essential that authorities should at the very least know far more about the lived reality of celibacy in the lives of priests and religious. The fourth element I mention is moral immaturity. Before a judgmental God, the all-important consideration is that we avoid wrong actions. But if human beings are to grow, two things are necessary. Yes, performing right actions, but also taking responsibility for one's actions. A one-sided insistence on doing the right thing and obeying the church in deciding what is the right thing to do, to the detriment of actually thinking for oneself and taking personal responsibility for one's own actions, produces immature human beings. It too is based on fear rather than on love. Moral immaturity of that kind does not prepare people to cope with the many and varied temptations that will come to them over the course of a lifetime. And so it must be added to the factors contributing to the unhealthy culture. The fifth of the elements I've called orthodoxy and orthopraxy. Orthodoxy is right beliefs. Orthopraxis is right actions. And the Catholic Church has traditionally given more emphasis to orthodoxy than it has to orthopraxy. You can do what you like, and that's easily forgiven. That includes sexual abuse. But you get out of line on what you believe, and it will come down on you like a ton of bricks. If a priest is loyal to all papal teachings, his moral mistakes can easily be forgiven. But if he's not loyal to any one teaching, no amount of good actions will redeem him. Then numbers 6 and 7, which are two of the biggest. 6 is sex and the angry God, I've called it. For centuries, the Church taught and still teaches that every sexual sin is a mortal sin. There are no so-called venial sins in the field of sex. All sexual sins are mortal. According to that teaching, even deliberately deriving pleasure from thinking about sex, no matter how briefly, is a mortal sin. The teaching may not be proclaimed as often today, but it's never been retracted, and it's still there. And it has affected countless people. Now that teaching fosters belief in an incredibly angry God who would send a person to an eternity in hell for thinking about sex once. It's an unbelievably angry God that's being talked about there. Indeed, it's the teaching on sexual morality, more than anything else, that has kept the idea of the angry God alive and kept it strong within the Church. And belief in so horrendously angry a God, specifically in the field of sex, has been a most significant contribution to the unhealthy culture I'm seeking to describe. Furthermore, this comes out very well in the things that Margaret presented to us a little while ago. This teaching placed the emphasis on the sexual sin against God. That was the mortal sin, remember, the sexual sin, rather than on the offence against the abused minor. Hence, remember Margaret put up, it was an affair. It was not what it should have been called, a crime. That's the first thing to say about it. This is a crime. And forget, the putting all the emphasis on the sexual sin. It was also an important part of the reasoning behind transferring a priest from one parish to another, because he'd committed a sexual sin. What's the remedy? He goes to confession, he repents, he's forgiven, and then he's put into the job again. If you look only at the sexual sin, that's what you can end up doing. You stop doing that only when you call it what it is. First of all, a crime. Furthermore, there is a need for a whole change in the entire understanding of sexual morality within the church. Sorry, this would take me hours and hours to go into. It's a big part of the book that I wrote, but there is a need for a profound change in understanding of all sexual morality within the church. Number 7 I call the mystique of the priesthood, and it's based in large part on a quotation from the letter to the Hebrews, chapter 5, verse 1. Every high priest chosen from among human beings is put in charge of things pertaining to God on their behalf. Now, the original text, of course, was in Greek, and the Greek text said only that one human being, exactly like all the others, is chosen for the task of priesthood. So you have 100 people here. You choose one to be a school teacher. You choose another to be a doctor. You choose another to drive buses. You choose another to be a priest. And that's all it said. It just said taken, nothing more. But the Latin translation that was made of that by St. Jerome, way back there, and that dominated for some 16 centuries, translated the word lambano, taken, as assumptus, taken up. So now it became every high priest taken up from human beings. So he's no longer down with the other 99, he's up here, above them. And this is the mystique I'm talking about. And that was certainly present when I was a student for the priesthood. I could never claim that it's not used today. I'm sure it is in many places. Now, countless Catholic people have experienced this attitude in their priests, that they consider themselves somehow above, taken up. I see a couple of Catholics actually nodding when I said that. Yes, I wonder. Now, this is exactly the kind of unhealthy idea that can contribute to abuse. And sexuality is only one of the ways in which can make priests and religious think that they are special, unlike other human beings, and not subject to the restrictions and even the moral laws that apply to other people. Furthermore, the privileges of this mystique will always be attractive to many inadequate personalities. It also gives priests and religious privileged access to minors that other people do not have, and it gives them a powerful spiritual authority over them, making it easier to abuse. Now, this has to change, but it won't be easy, because it's very difficult to change an ethos, a mystique. This must change, for it denies the essential humanity of the priest or religious. And so it establishes a whole series of false relationships at the heart of the community. Priests and religious are ordinary human beings. Now, that ought to be the most obvious statement in the world. But authorities in the church, priests, religious, and, let me add, Catholic people, all have much work to do in this field. Because I find that wherever there are priests trying to climb down off the pedestal, there can be Catholic lay people insisting they get right back up again. You know, I've met this many times. When I was ordained a bishop, I had a game of golf with a guy a week or two later. You know, hit off, good shot, my lord. Excuse me, my name's Geoffrey, we play here. Yes, my lord. Get back up on your pedestal. There can be the most dangerous insistence that priests and religious must be perfect, or if they can't be perfect, they must at least appear to be perfect. An extraordinary number of people believe the naive idea that priests and religious are celibate, so they can't really have sexual desires and feelings the way the rest of us do. Well, the mystique has to go, and that means change in the hierarchy, change in priests, but it also means change in Catholic people. Number 8, professionalism. Over several decades now, there has been a strong move towards greater professionalism in most fields of human activity. But priests and religious have limped a long way behind. Their attitude has been one symptom of the idea of being above other human beings, and so not needing the assistance and controls that others do. Among the many elements that one could speak about that need immediate consideration, there would be better selection processes of candidates, with a wider selection panel than just clerics, and with full use of psychological assessment. A training that places as much emphasis on human development as on religious and priestly development. For you simply cannot have a good priest who is not first a good human being. It's just not possible. A proper professional appraisal every 5 years, with the community participating in it and making comments, and so particularly pointing to any signs of harmful or dangerous activity. A supervisor with whom priests or religious can discuss their work and how they have dealt with problematic situations. Obligatory in-service training. A code of conduct. A form of dress that serves to identify the priest or religious, but is not antiquated, as it does not serve to stress their otherness from ordinary people. An attention to living conditions such that a healthy emotional life is facilitated. Number 9, a pope who can't admit mistakes. I'm now fully into the field, not of causes of abuse, but of causes of the response to abuse. Though the ones I already talked about have affected that as well. But now I'm right into that area. Infallibility in practice extends way beyond the formally infallible. It's a phenomenon known within the church as creeping infallibility, where infallibility creeps down and applies to more and more things. Whether it be a solemn dogma or an ordinary teaching, or merely an ancient law or practice, it would be extraordinarily difficult for a pope of today to stand up and say, all my predecessors of the last 2,000 years have been wrong, and I'm alone and right. And that applies not solely to matters where there's formal infallibility, but it applies to all those matters where, yes, there's been a constant teaching for 2,000 years, the argument it can't be wrong, or where a great deal of papal prestige has been invested in a particular teaching. And it goes way beyond teachings. For example, celibacy is a law. That's all it is. And everybody knows that. But it would take a really courageous pope to say, look, they might all have been wrong, so I'm going to put it on the table for discussion. That would take enormous courage. Then, number 10 is loyalty to a silent pope. For much of the problem within the Catholic Church, if you're going to blame one person, it's unfair to put all the blame on one person, but the one person more than any other you have to blame would be Pope John Paul II, who was Pope for 26 years, for much of the story of abuse coming to light. Imagine this, way back in 1988, let's say, he'd come to the microphone in St. Peter's Square and said, look, I've just been presented with a report detailing all these acts of sexual abuse by priests throughout the world. I've never read anything more horrifying in my entire life, and I'm going to fight this with every power I have, and I call on every bishop in the world to support me. We are going to reach out to victims. We will not worry about the name of the church. If he'd said all that back in 1988, how different things might have been. See, bishops take an oath of loyalty to the Pope. Not God, by the way, not the Church, the Pope. And they're very loyal to that. And I'm not saying that every bishop would have listened to the Pope and done exactly what he was asked to do, but I do believe it would have made a profound difference. The difference would have been this: loyalty to the Pope, so powerful for bishops, would have worked in favour of victims, whereas in fact it worked against them, because that Pope was silent. And because he wasn't just silent, he did not handle the two cases that were absolutely on his desk: the Cardinal Archbishop of Vienna of the time, and then the leader of the Legionaries of Christ, the infamous Maciel del Golado. With authority goes responsibility, and he many times claimed the power, the authority. He has to admit the responsibility. Number 11 is then very powerful: a culture of secrecy. Within Italy, there is a powerful culture of what is called bella figura. Now, literally it means beautiful figure, but its real meaning is you must always put forward good appearances. So that I always remember I was there as a student when the Olympic Games were held in Rome in 1960, and a month before they were woefully unprepared. You know, all sorts of things weren't ready. So they sent out an army of people with big buckets of white paint and big brushes, and they painted everything. And as long as the athletes didn't jump too hard on top of it, it all looked good. But that was bella figura at work. Now, bella figura affects far beyond the church. It affects all of Italian society, and it goes back to Roman times. You must appreciate that. It goes back 2,000 years. The Romans were into it. So it is a deeply entrenched culture in that country, and partly for that reason, not entirely, it's therefore a very deeply entrenched culture within the Vatican. And again, bishops around the world have been affected by it and have been caught into acting that way, particularly when it comes to talking about the Pope. For many centuries then, secrecy has been an important part of the culture of the Vatican. Wrong actions can easily be pardoned, and the unpardonable sin is making those wrong actions public. Do you see how this has affected abuse? And I know this one from very personal experience, because I made one publicly known and wasn't very popular because of it. It's been a powerful factor in the mishandling of abuse, so that it's a sad fact that if the entire church has been slow to respond properly, the slowest part of all has been its central bureaucracy. I mean, there has been some change here in Australia over the years, but quite recently, when it all blew up on continental Europe, you know, I saw that as a good thing, because firstly, victims in those countries were coming forward and could get some response and some assistance. But more importantly, the people in the Vatican were only going to pay attention when it got to continental Europe and got to Europe and got to Rome itself. Before that, it was all dismissed as an Anglo-Saxon problem. And I met that attitude many, many times. You know, those dreadful Anglo-Saxons, they're all immersed in sexual morality. These terrible things happen there, but they'd never happen among us. So it was actually good that it got to continental Europe, and they would, sort of began to look at it. But then out came a whole host of responses, defensive, blaming the media, regarding the fairness of the way the church has been treated as the central issue, protesting that the church is better than other organisations that have got off lightly, defending the Pope at all costs, and dissociating the church from wrongdoers within it. Various members of that central bureaucracy have shown that they have missed what truly matters. Finally, number 12, the sense of the faithful. The Second Vatican Council spoke of the sensus fidei or sensus fidelium, that instinctive sensitivity and power of discernment that the members of the church collectively possess in matters of faith and morals. And it's surely simple fact that the people of God as a whole would never have got us into the mess we're in. For their understanding of the faith would have insisted on a far more rigorous and, dare I say it, far more Christian response. It is their children who have been abused. It's they who have had their faith destroyed. They have even, in one way or another, had to pay for the mess. The Pope and the bishops have lost credibility. It's only the people of God who can restore it to them. If the church is to move forwards, these painful lessons must be learned. Now, I've spoken about 12 factors that I see within the Catholic Church. I believe, however, every institution, certainly every church, but every institution, needs to look at itself. What are the factors within their own culture? Now, there have been failures in every aspect within the church, but I'll know that the Catholic Church is finally beginning to get it and finally getting serious when it publicly, and I insist publicly, talks about matters such as the 12 I've raised. Until they do, we're getting nowhere.